Now I would like to give the floor to Chrissi Kelly, founder of Absent and CKOS.
So thank you very much, everyone, especially to the organizers and to Claire for her very moving description of what it's like to live without a sense of smell. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Chrissi Kelly. I lost my sense of smell in 2012. I started my first Facebook group in 2015 because by then I had learned about smell training and I found it such a fascinating study and got very excited about it. So I opened up a Facebook group for smell training and that brought in a few people. And then in 2019, the work that I was doing, it became a charity that was called Absent. And we were in place and ready to go when the pandemic hit. And of course that brought a huge number of people into our platforms on Facebook as well as elsewhere, 95,000 at the peak. That was a lot of conversations, obviously, and there were challenges involved with that. In February of this year, unfortunately, Absent had to close, but my work continues. The network, which is the one thing that I've kept from Absent, continues to be very busy. We are bringing in new people every day. They find us through all kinds of ways. They're recommended by their doctors or health platforms, NHS. And so we are continuing to grow. In my time as being a patient advocate, I've had the chance to work with a lot of wonderful people and have co-authored, well, I hesitate to use the phrase co-authored, but worked as a patient advocate to bring the voice of patients into the research. And of course, in observing the literally thousands of conversations that were going on all the time, was able to generate themes to sort of notify the researchers to what was going on. So the word cloud that you're looking at is one that I created after I put out a questionnaire in the Facebook group, the COVID-19 Facebook group. What would you like from your doctor? And this is gives you an idea of what the answers were. But now I'd like you to take a look at this. And you'll see the words highlighted that are non-clinical. And what I see when I look at this is that what patients need is not necessarily clinical help. They need other things as well. They need other kinds of support. So I think it would be really interesting to let you know that there's been a great change in the way people are interacting with one another. If we look at the sort of the height of the pandemic crisis and look at the way things are happening now, I see two very different kinds of things. So during the height of the pandemic, it was very tempestuous. There was high anxiety. People were bringing in all kinds of misinformation. That was one of the challenges associated with having so many thousands of people coming in all the time. But the idea that drove the patients into the group was that they wanted to share this feeling that they needed to see a doctor, and of course no one was really able to see a doctor, but they felt that the ENT was going to have the answer to all their questions. And of course, we know that that's not the case. There was overuse of social media. I'm sure that exacerbated the problem of this general sort of anxiety. But it was something that, thank goodness, passed, and now in the CKOS network, we have a much different vibe. It's very sympathetic, it's very supportive. There is a lot of talk about acceptance, and what's so interesting is that when new people come in who are in this anxious phase, there are all these old people, if I can call them that, who have been there a long time, who know where they're going and what's happening to them, who immediately cluster around them, join the conversation and say, we all understand, and don't worry, we're all here to listen to you, and it's a much more supportive kind of vibe. And the quote that I've used to sum up this new trend in the patient group is, I have a role to play in helping others. We know that smell loss, obviously it's a sensory disorder, but it's also very much emotional. And this is a quote from somebody who, and it struck me because she comes in, she's new, but she has realized that the source of her problem is really her emotional reaction to what's going on. So she says she is in shock and grief, and I think that really is a beautiful summation. I have been trying to understand my own loss of smell. I am now thankfully quite well recovered, good enough for a good quality of life. But in the time when I didn't have a good sense of smell, I often struggled to find words. 12 years on, I still don't have the right kind of vocabulary to explain to people what a unique bereavement this is, what a peculiar way it is to go through life without a sense of smell. And Claire summed that up beautifully for us earlier. I like to think about the fact that every time anyone goes to the doctor and the doctor looks in their nose and says everything is fine, the doctor is probably not seeing all these horrible monsters that the person has brought into the office with them. And that includes depression, anger, resentment, anorexia, sometimes eating too much, and obviously the anxiety of body odors is very much there on display. It is the most discouraging thing you can imagine to have a doctor say to you, there's nothing wrong that I can see and you can't be helped. So, other impacts from loss of smell. As I mentioned to you, this inability to find words to describe. We all have a narrative about our own. Anyone with a chronic condition has got an inner narrative that they use to explain their own personal story. And when you can't even describe that to yourself, it becomes chaotic. You can't describe it to your family, to your friends. It's frustrating, and especially for those people, and I spoke earlier about the fluctuations involved after COVID, for those people who don't see a coherent pathway toward recovery, it's a very difficult thing to live with. So first and foremost, that kind of confused, chaotic narrative is very, very tiring and defeating. Now, we know that bench to bedside is going to be years. There's no way of sugarcoating that. But from my point of view, there are still a lot of people who are suffering. I mentioned that in the network, the vibe is less anxious, it's very supportive, but individually, people are suffering. And we need support for that now. And so I would like to propose the bedside to breakfast table space, and that's where we help people with other interventions that are not clinical. So what does that mean? That means helping people be informed. People come into the group and really have no idea of what's going on. So we need to help them be informed about their condition. They're together in a group of people that have lost their sense of smell, and if you don't explain to them, the polyp patient will think that they're the same as the head injury patient. So there has to be a lot of education involved in working with large groups of people with smell disorders. We need to give people confidence in self-care. There is quite a bit of a lack of knowledge in exactly how to do that. And in doing all this, we give people agency to manage their own condition and take them from being passive patients to being active in their own recovery. We all know that smell is a very personal thing. It's between you and the odorant molecule, but there is something very interesting about what happens when patients with smell disorders get together around a table. So this was a smell training session that I run. I do that quite a bit. I do that at the University of London as well. And when you get people around a table talking and sniffing things together, and then you suddenly see them, everyone's put their heads together, they're trying to smell the same thing, they're talking about their experience, and this is something that is very therapeutic. So I encourage as much in-person interaction as possible. As far as self-care goes, I see that coming in two different areas. There's self-care of the nose. As I said, people need to be informed. People need to know. You'd be amazed at how little people understand the use of nasal sprays. They think they go into the grocery store or the pharmacy and every spray that they see in front of them is the same, which of course we know it's not. And very often they just don't bother, or they haven't been told that there's a right way and a wrong way to do these things, and we want to help people understand what they are, how to use them, how to use the kaiteki maneuver rather than putting your head on the floor and so on. Avoiding further damage to the nose. One lady in our group was sniffing bleach every day to see if she was recovering. So we want to help them understand the best way to look after their noses. Smell training, obviously, where suitable, know about the medications they're using, and finally, I think, especially for people who've had polyps, if it's not working, very often they'll say, well, I've tried all that and it just doesn't work for me. I think it's worth encouraging people to revisit, go back to the doctor and say, is this exactly the problem? One person who had a head injury said that she decided to go back to the doctor and discovered she had polyps. So I think there's an adage about the patient having as many diseases as they want. So I think that's also worth considering. As far as mental health is concerned, cognitive behavioral therapy, things like ACT therapy, both of which are used for chronic pain, I think that's quite useful. I think that's to be recommended. I mean, obviously I'm not the doctor, but I think these are things that need to be looked into. And as in the chronic pain space, exercise, getting outdoors, these are all things that people in my group talk about. The sensory enrichment, whether that's through music, painting, bright colors, knitting is another really interesting one. People really seem to enjoy the distraction of repetitive hand movements of knitting, and there is actually evidence for this in the chronic pain space. We also want to make people curious about the foods that they eat and explore mouthfeel. I've just done another event on this. It was really interesting what people enjoy. I'm talking about people who have no sense of smell. We compare different kinds of foods, gooey and sloppy and crispy and crunchy and chewy and all those kind of things, and especially getting people to remember their favorite foods before they lost their sense of smell and thinking about what texture elements of those foods were so enjoyable. And finally, being together with people like me. So my takeaways today are the profile of COVID patients in patient groups is changing. There's a different vibe now. There are longer-term cases that really do need to have better mental health support. The best support comes from people who have lived experience. And I would like to propose a plan for bedside breakfast table. There is a huge untapped resource out there of patients. If we can get them together, get them to see how beneficial it is, not only for others but also for themselves, something that we hear about a lot in the network. It's a wonderful way of supporting people in a space where everyone feels understood. And finally, because we are in Iceland, I would like to remind you that the nose is just the tip of the iceberg. Thank you very much.